In the second part of my conversation with my Dharma friend Loppon Yudron Wangmo, she explains the lineage she teaches in, the Dudjom Tersar, and her approach to teaching at Mayum Mountain, her organization. Plus, she shares the benefits of ngondro, or the foundational practices students of Tibetan Buddhism do before engaging in Vajrayana practices, Dzogchen, or Mahamudra. If you missed part 1, you can find a link below.
Well, I hope some of the folks listening, if they've been looking for someone that they can connect with and really receive these like authentic Tibetan teachings from, I hope they are willing to follow it up and check out, your website. Would you tell us a bit about Mayum Mountain?
Oh, that
And
name came to Mayum means great, like great mother, or mother. It literally means like mother consort, but this is like an exalted female figure. That word just came to me. Mountain is a common name for Dharma centers, and I don't know why Mayum Mountain came to me, but it was not logical. But it's ended up being that people are still, even decades after the role of women in Buddhism has been being addressed by countless books and teachers, they're still feeling like kind of a need, not just for women teachers, but for discussions of, like I just did a class on the female lamas of my tradition. I don't think anybody's ever done that specific class about the Dudjom Tersar tradition, and that was packed. People were hungry.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask you this earlier, but you've mentioned this phrase, the Dudjom Tersar tradition, a couple of times. Would you be willing to just explain what that is very quickly for someone who's not familiar with, well, it's very rich.
Very quickly, Dudjom Lingpa in the 19th century was a almost self-arisen Buddha. He was an incarnation of a Buddha, of a previous teachers who attained complete awakening. And he was raised and taught by dakinis and kind of mystical visions and stuff from babyhood on. And so you can read his biography is called A Clear Mirror. I think it's out of print right now, but I bet you could find a copy somewhere. And his life is all, half, you can't really tell what's a vision and what's an encounter with human. And he was never rich, and he wasn't really very famous during his life, maybe at the very end. And so he had a series he would find earth treasures. These are like mystical revelations of Buddhists and the Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana practices and commentaries, and tantras were mystical texts. I don't know the right translation there. And he did about 6 months of foundational practices and stuff, but mostly it was his own self-arisen wisdom and it all completely fit with Buddhist philosophy perfectly, even though he was not a scholar at all. This all just came to him, and it was so amazing, particularly the practice of the great wrathful Dakini Trungpa Nakmo spread like wildfire all over Tibet. So that body of work which is texts. There are some physical objects he also discovered that belong to the family, but these are what we experience with texts. And then lamas who follow in his tradition explain those texts. And then he reincarnated as Dudjom Rinpoche, Jigtrul Yeshe Dorje, in 1907 or 1904. Might be 1904, who became one of the most important teachers of the 20th century. And he himself had revelatory practices that came forth in texts and so forth. And he was a very genteel, kind of refined lama who matched scholarly knowledge with, but that was a case where this tulku system, the recognition of the subsequent life of a teacher, there was no question about it, because he greeted his previous students when they arrived he was a little toddler, and he would say, "Hi there," and he said their names. And so that's
having never met them before in that lifetime.
I've never met them before. Just it was obvious. So all the teachers of best teachers of the era were his teachers, and he became the great savior. And he and Dudjom Tersar became the great saviors of the Nyingma lineage in the time when, after the Chinese communists took over Tibet, and the lamas were driven out in large part. The Nyingma texts, their library of Dudjom Rinpoche and the library of Dudjom Tersar were smuggled out over the mountains, and then he started giving all the transmissions, because these are living things. These aren't like books that you read for entertainment. They require transmission and empowerments and so forth to practice them. And so he spent much of his life, over 50, restoring and making sure that the continuity went on for us now. So we have everything thanks to those two. So anyway, he was Lama Tarchin and Lama Pema direct teacher. Dudjom Rinpoche. Lama Tarchin completed 3-year retreat and more under his direct supervision in Tibet. So, so I have this, my notes, I'm so protective of them. They're in a storage right now, and I hope they are safe. Oh, man. They're like gems. So I'm not really teaching myself. This is how when I'm getting to the Vajrayana level, I'm just passing on their words, and then maybe a little bit about how practicalities about how to work with this in the world today as we know it. So I feel very comfortable with that. There's I don't think there's any big ego in there for me. As long as people are interested, I want to share, because those teachers aren't around anymore. The ones who were trained in Tibet, they've passed on. So their wisdom, thank goodness, Lama Tarchin on heartteachings.com, his widow and a couple of his students maintain a video archive. So a lot was preserved that way. He made a lot of videos towards the end of his life. Thank goodness. But there's still a lot of hidden oral instructions. And with Lama Dudjom Rinpoche, who wasn't as famous, also very important teachers of this unique strand of Nyingma school, these non-monastic, non-scholastic, but highly educated in Tantra and Dzogchen people.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify for anyone who's not familiar with the Tibetan tradition, that you mentioned texts, that the Dudjom Tersar teaching cycle really was revealed as these like treasure texts. The texts contain practices. So, as somebody does the practice and has deep realization with it, they pass on that practice. And, you're being humble, but I do just want to also say for you that this is the traditional way of doing it, that you're passing on your teacher's instructions and the wisdom that's come down through the lineage. So, to have somebody holding that role of the Loppon or the teacher is really incredible and valuable. And I just feel so grateful as a Westerner that there are folks like you out there doing this, because I find we just live in a very different culture from what Jigme Lingpa was born into a couple of centuries ago in Tibet. And honestly, as a woman also, it's just really nice to learn from a woman. So I appreciate what you're doing to pass on these incredible and profound teachings and to make them available to us sort of in our like native cultural language.
Sure. And I love doing it. That's why I love doing it. And at the same time, I'm everybody has Tibetan teachers as well. So we need kind of bridge people, I think. This is like when I had the experience of the name Mayum Mountain coming to me, a visual of an island like that doesn't exist out beyond the Hawaiian Islands, maybe, a little farther, that was in the middle of the Pacific. So it was like, I felt later it was like a symbol of bridging, of this being a stepping stone for people. I'm old, and there's lots of really well-trained, particularly the scholar tradition is doing very well in the Nyingma school. There's lots of well-trained, called Khenpos, which means they've really been educated for more than 10 years. So, this comparable to what you encountered with your PhD training, but very traditional. And the yogi tradition is not as easy to find these days. So I feel like I can, whatever I can do in these few years before I croak is really, really great.
Please may your lotus feet remain quite some time yet.
But anyway, that's what I'm doing. I'm really excited about it. And so the way that people get in touch and is to sign up for the newsletter through the mayummountain.net website. The newsletter is really kept up to date, and it's got what we're doing now. So.
And what sorts of practices, if someone doesn't have a background in this, or even if they do, what kinds of practices are offered by you and by the other teachers at Mayum Mountain?
Yeah, so far there aren't a lot of other teachers. There's some lecturers coming in doing talks over the next few months. And we have a couple of scholars on our board I'm trying to coax out of their PhD chambers. And, they're really wonderful on Mahayana training. So for me, I've been teaching a lot in the last year, the foundational practices, the ngondro, called the Dakini heart essence, a ngondro tuktik in Tibetan, which is centered on the figure of Yeshe Sogyal and Guru Rinpoche together, which is symbolized for the father and mother of Tibetan Buddhism, bringing these principles together, and in the process bringing us from being an ordinary person to somebody who has turned their mind to the Dharma, who's taken refuge in the Buddha, generated the enlightened intention to benefit all beings equally. In other words, attain complete enlightenment for the benefit of all these beings. And so we can teach and so forth. And then
I just
merging our minds.
Sorry, I just want to add a note about ngondro, or foundational practices, which we've mentioned again a couple of times and haven't explained.